Welcome to the FinGlimpse podcast, where we analyze the world of business, finance, and the economy. We cover the latest market news, economic trends, and some interesting businesses. As a standard disclaimer, this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Always do your own research. Now, let's get started.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, your way to, well, really get informed. And today we are diving into a really fascinating report from NITI Aayog in India.
That's right, their main policy think tank. This report dropped in July 2025, and it's essentially a bold plan, a blueprint for how India wants to transform its chemical industry.
It really boosts its role in global supply chains.
Exactly. Though it's worth mentioning, NITI Aayog itself puts a small disclaimer in there. They took care, but they don't vouch for all the data or methods. So room for interpretation.
Good to keep in mind. So what's the big picture here? What jumps out?
Well, the scale, first off, India's chemical sector is already huge. We're talking around $220 billion. It's fundamental to their economy.
Okay, $220 billion. That sounds massive.
It is. But here's the hook, the really surprising part. Despite that size, India only consumes about 3 to 3.5% of the world's chemicals.
No, only 3 to 3.5%. For a country that size with that industry value, that feels low.
It really does. And that disconnect, that gap, is exactly what this report is about. It's not just about growing a bit. It's about a major repositioning, making India a much bigger, maybe even essential player, especially with, global supply chains shifting around.
Right. So our mission today...
Let's unpack this report. We'll dig into the key insights, maybe find some surprising facts about where India stands now.
And lay out the path they're planning to take, the ambitions, the challenges, how they plan to overcome them.
Exactly. Let's give you the core of what's important here.
Okay, let's start with the current situation. Give us a bit more detail on India's chemical footprint right now.
Sure. So globally, they're the sixth largest producer.
Sixth largest.
And third largest in Asia. So definitely significant. It contributes about 7% to their national GDP.
7% is substantial.
It really is. And think about where those chemicals go. Pharmaceuticals, textiles, cars, agriculture. All these massive Indian industries rely on chemicals as raw materials.
They're foundational, really.
Absolutely. Many sectors just wouldn't work without them.
Okay, so a strong base. But you mentioned a disconnect. The report talks about a surprising imbalance, a structural constraint.
Yes, that's a key point. India has traditionally focused very heavily on bulk, commodity-grade chemicals, and polymers. The basic stuff.
What does that mean in practice? Can you give an example from the report?
Yeah, definitely. Look at propylene. It's a basic building block chemical. In India, a staggering 95% of it goes into making just polypropylene, or PP. Basic plastic.
55%, wow.
Right. Globally, that figure is more like 70%.
Big difference.
Huge. And it's similar with ethylene, another building block. 75% goes into polyethylene, PE, in India. Globally, it's around 63%.
So they're channeling almost everything into these basic plastics.
Pretty much. And by doing that, they're missing out on the chance to make a whole range of more advanced, higher-value products downstream.
Like what kind of product?
Things like specialized plastics for medical devices, materials for high-tech electronics, sophisticated packaging, engineering plastics. It's like having a really versatile raw ingredient and only making one simple dish with it.
Okay, I see. So this focus limits their ability to diversify and capture more value.
Exactly. It's a major constraint they need to address.
And that leads us to the challenges. What are the big hurdles the report identifies? What's holding India back right now?
Well, it's not a short list. First, there's that heavy reliance on imports we touched on. It actually led to a trade deficit of about $31 billion in 2023. India's been a net importer of chemicals since the year 2000.
31 billion deficit. Ouch. So they're buying more chemicals than they're selling internationally.
Precisely. Then there's limited feedstock availability, getting enough of the basic raw materials cost-effectively.
Infrastructure issues too, I bet.
Definitely. Infrastructural bottlenecks are a major point. And then you have regulatory complexities. Getting approvals, navigating the rules. It can be slow and cumbersome.
That sounds like a tough environment to operate in. Is there one challenge that stands out as the biggest potential deal breaker?
It's probably the combination. The report seems to suggest that the import reliance, coupled with the regulatory hurdles, they feed off each other. If they can't fix the regulatory side and ensure reliable, affordable feedstock, it's hard to see how they attract the massive investment needed.
Okay, so significant challenges, but the ambitions are equally significant, right? What kind of growth are they aiming for?
The numbers are pretty staggering. The report projects the market could grow to $450 billion by 2030.
Wow, doubling in just a few years.
Roughly, yeah. And then potentially leaping to $850 billion, maybe even $1 trillion by 2040.
$1 trillion chemical industry by 2040. What would that kind of scale actually mean for India?
It would be transformative. The goal by 2030 isn't just market size. It's about increasing their global value chain share to 5–6%.
Up from the current 3.5%.
Right. Becoming a net zero importer, basically, making as much as they use.
That would reverse the trend since 2000.
Exactly. And generating somewhere between 700,000 and 1 million new jobs.
Huge employment potential.
Massive. And you have to see this against the backdrop of what else is happening in India.
What do you mean?
Well, powerful tailwinds are helping. Rising incomes, they expect household consumption to grow by $1.5 trillion by 2030. Around 140 million new households earning over $10,000 a year.
So, more domestic demand.
More demand, increasing urbanization, changing consumer tastes. Plus, the big one, global supply chains are reshaping.
The whole China plus one idea, companies looking for alternatives.
That's a big part of it. It creates this window, this opportunity for India to position itself as a reliable, attractive alternative partner in chemicals.
Okay, so the stage is set, big challenges, massive ambition, and some favorable wins. How does the report propose getting there? You mentioned 4 pillars.
Right. The strategy is built around 4 key growth themes. Think of them as the main avenues for action.
Lay them out for us.
Okay, first, tapping into export markets. Basically, doubling down on areas where they're already strong, like paints, coatings, polyester fiber, carbon black.
Makes sense. Build on existing strengths. What's next?
Second is growing sunrise sectors. This is about pushing into new, high-growth areas. Think battery chemicals, electronic chemicals. The stuff driving future tech.
That sounds critical for long-term competitiveness, the battery chemicals especially.
Absolutely. It's about securing supply for their own EV and electronics boom, but also becoming a global supplier.
Okay, 2 down. Third pillar.
Third, solving for production competitiveness. This means tackling those cost and efficiency issues, improving feedstock access for specific chemicals like EVA, styrene, phenol, nylon 6, making them cheaper to produce domestically.
So import substitution, essentially.
Partly, yes, and boosting overall efficiency.
Yeah.
And the fourth theme is unlocking technology access.
Getting the know-how.
Exactly. Acquiring or developing the technologies needed for more complex chemicals. Things like TDI and MDI, those are used in foams and insulation, plus acetic acid, titanium dioxide, stuff they currently import or lack domestic tech for.
So exports, new sectors, cost competitiveness, and technology. That's the what. How about the how?
Yeah.
You mentioned policy interventions.
Yes, underpinning those 4 themes are 7 core policy interventions. This is the real action plan.
Okay, what are they?
Let's list them out. 1, establishing world-class chemical hubs, big industrial parks. 2, developing port infrastructure to handle all the trade. 3, introducing an OPEX subsidy scheme. We can dig into that. 4, fostering technology and innovation R&D support. 5, fast-tracking environmental clearances, a big bottleneck. 6, securing better free trade agreements, or FTAs. 7, and finally, upgrading talent and skills in the workforce.
That's a comprehensive list, a real top-to-bottom approach.
It really is. It touches pretty much every aspect of the ecosystem.
Okay, let's dive into a couple of those foundational ones. Starting with the chemical hubs. The report calls them PCPIRs.
Right. Petroleum, chemicals, and petrochemicals investment regions. Think of them as massive, integrated industrial zones designed specifically for these industries.
And India has some already.
They have 4 approved ones.
Yeah.
Visakhapatnam, Dahej, Paradip, and Cuddalore-Nagapattinam, though that last one's on hold.
But you mentioned earlier only one is really firing on all cylinders.
Pretty much. Only Dahej in Gujarat has really set up a proper dedicated management board and seen significant development.
Why have the others struggled?
The report points to familiar issues, difficulties acquiring land, slow regulatory clearances, and also international companies being hesitant to invest big without having majority control, which India's policies sometimes restricted.
So execution has been a challenge. The report uses Jurong Island in Singapore as a benchmark, right? What makes Jurong so successful?
Jurong is kind of the gold standard. It's attracted something like $40 billion in investment, hosts over 100 chemical companies, and it has massive cracker capacity. Crackers are the huge plants that break down raw materials into basic chemicals.
Like ethylene and propylene you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Jurong can produce 4 million tons of ethylene and 2.5 million tons of propylene per year. Huge scale.
What's the secret sauce there?
It's a combination. Really well-developed shared infrastructure pipelines, utilities, waste treatment that companies can plug into, great connectivity, and, crucially, very effective government coordination and support. The government even owns stakes in some third-party service providers to ensure reliability.
Okay, so a real public-private partnership focused on enabling the industry. How does the NITI Aayog report suggest India replicate that?
Well, they propose a new structure. At the top, an empowered central committee. This would be chaired by the highest official in the Department of Chemicals and Petrochemical.
To provide oversight and direction.
Right. Oversee strategy, hand out incentives, track performance across all the hubs. They'd also manage a new GVC chemical fund to support this.
And at the local level, for each hub.
Each hub would get its own dedicated local administrative body. The report suggests maybe a special purpose vehicle, an SPV.
A focused entity just for that hub.
Exactly. Responsible for the day-to-day running, attracting investors, managing land allocation, overseeing the shared facilities,
And importantly,
and crucially, providing pre-approved environmental clearances for factories setting up within the hub's boundaries. That could save a lot of time.
that sounds like a big deal, streamlining that process. What about the physical stuff, the infrastructure within these hubs?
That's key too. The report stresses the need for anchor tenants, usually big refineries or petrochemical companies that provide the basic feedstock.
The raw materials.
Yeah. Plus reliable power and water, world-class waste management, strong safety systems, labs, maybe even specialized support for smaller companies and residential areas nearby.
So creating a whole ecosystem. And how will they build these? Are they focusing on the existing PCPIRs or starting new ones?
Both. The report suggests a two-track approach. First, revamp the existing ones. Boost cracker capacity and infrastructure at Dahej and Paradip. Get anchor tenants and fix connectivity issues at Visakhapatnam. And try to restart the Cuddalore-Nagapattinam project with better planning.
Okay, fixing what's there. And the second track.
Develop entirely new clusters. They're looking at potential sites in states like Maharashtra, Karnataka, West Bengal, Kerala, and others.
Based on what criteria?
Things like existing refinery capacity nearby,
Yeah.
access to ports. But they also acknowledge challenges,
Yeah.
like high population density in some potential areas.
Right. Okay, that connects nicely to the second intervention, developing port infrastructure.
Mm.
Clearly vital for imports and exports.
Absolutely essential,
Okay.
especially for handling and storing large volumes of chemicals, some hazardous like ammonia, ethylene, natural gas. You need specialized facilities.
India has a massive coastline, lots of ports, but the report says they're falling short.
Yeah, compared to leading global chemical ports, there's a gap. Take Antwerp in Belgium. In 2022-23, Antwerp handled 286 million tons of total cargo. India's busiest ports, Kandla and Paradip, handled around 138 million tons each.
Less than half.
Right. And it's not just total volume, it's specialized capacity. Antwerp has storage for 9.6 million tons of liquid bulk chemicals. Kandla, maybe 3-4 million tons.
Big difference in storage, too.
And other issues mentioned are inadequate mechanization loading and unloading isn't as fast or efficient, and poor last-mile connectivity getting goods to and from the port.
So what can India learn from Antwerp specifically? What makes it a top chemical port?
Antwerp has an incredible network of pipelines, about 1,000 kilometers connecting different facilities, carrying 48 different products.
Wow, 1,000 kilometers of pipeline within the port area.
Within the wider port complex, yeah. Plus great connections via rail, road, barge, and they're investing in digital tools and innovation hub. It's a really integrated, efficient system.
So the recommendation for India?
The report suggests setting up a dedicated chemical committee specifically for ports. It would bring together people from relevant ministries, port authorities, industry experts.
To focus just on the chemical sector's needs.
Exactly. To boost capacity, optimize the infrastructure they have, improve safety, make things more sustainable. They'd focus on targeted improvements in 8 high-potential port clusters around India.
Okay, let's shift gears to fueling the growth, incentives, and innovation. The report proposes an OPEX subsidy scheme. Can you break down OPEX for us again and why subsidizing it helps?
Sure, OPEX is just operating expenditure. It's the day-to-day running costs. raw materials, energy, salaries, maintenance.
Not the initial investment costs, but the ongoing costs.
Right. And subsidizing OPEX directly lowers the cost of making chemicals in India. It makes domestic manufacturers instantly more price competitive against imports. The idea is to boost domestic production, cut down that $75 billion import bill.
Especially for chemicals where they rely heavily on just one or two countries.
Exactly. And also unlock more export potential by making Indian products cheaper. Think of it as a temporary boost to help them scale up and grab market share.
How would the subsidy actually work? What's the structure?
The proposal is for incentives based on incremental sales, so sales above a baseline. It would run for 5 years, starting at 10% incentive in the first year, then gradually stepping down to 6% by the 5th year.
So a temporary boost that encourages growth, what kind of impact do they expect?
They project it could trigger an extra INR 65,000 crore in investment. That's about, what, $8-9 billion?
Significant investment.
And generate an additional INR 3 lakh crore in turnover over those 5 years. That's roughly $36 billion. And the incentives would be targeted towards specific chemical groups like intermediates for pharma and agrochemicals, battery and electronic chemicals, petrochemicals.
Okay, that seems like a powerful lever. Now, what about technology and innovation? You mentioned R&D spending is low in India.
Yeah, that was a striking figure. Indian chemical companies spend around 0.7% of their revenues on R&D.
Compared to a global average of...
About 2.3%, so significantly lower.
And that obviously holds back innovation. What are the roadblocks there?
Several things. Funding is tough, especially for smaller companies. There isn't enough collaboration between universities and industry. They lack major industry forums like the big chemical conferences you see in the Middle East or Europe for sharing ideas.
And talent.
A critical shortage of skilled R&D personnel. The report mentions maybe a 30% shortfall in some specialized areas.
So how do they plan to fix this? What's the approach?
It's a two-pronged approach again. First, developing more technology domestically.
Wow.
They propose setting up a dedicated R&D fund specifically for chemicals research, with an annual budget around $150–200 million.
What would that fund focus on?
Key areas like sustainable chemistry, green processes, carbon capture and storage, CCUS. Also, process improvements, new types of reactors, better ways to separate chemicals, and developing entirely new molecules, which is vital for pharma and other advanced sectors.
Who would manage this fund?
An agency involving both the Department of Science and Technology, DST, and the Department of Chemicals and Petrochemicals, DCPC. The idea is to make sure it supports smaller companies too, and really pushes for stronger industry-academia links.
Okay, so boosting homegrown R&D. What's the second prong?
Acquiring access to specific technologies from abroad.
Through partnerships.
Exactly. Encouraging partnerships with multinational corporations, MNCs, to bring in tech that India doesn't have readily available.
For which kinds of products?
Things like acetic acid, those MDI, TDI chemicals for foams, battery materials, areas where foreign companies currently hold key patents or know-how.
And how would they attract those MNCs to share or license their tech?
Through incentives, maybe tax breaks, grants for setting up joint ventures, or even helping to subsidize the cost of licensing critical technologies that are deemed a national priority.
Okay, so a mix of building and buying technology. Now let's tackle the path clearing, regulations, and talent. That environmental clearance issue sounds like a major headache. Why does it take so long in India?
It's a really important question the report tackles. Officially, the process is supposed to take around 255 days.
Okay, about 8 or 9 months.
But the reality, 90% of projects face delays. The average delay is 196 days.
Another 6 months on top.
Yep. So the total time often stretches closer to 2 years. Compare that to maybe a year in the U.S. or 12–18 months in the EU.
And sometimes even longer.
Shockingly, yes. The report mentions some delays hitting over 1,000 days. Almost 3 years.
That must kill projects.
It absolutely does. It balloons costs, creates huge uncertainty, and scares off investors, both foreign and domestic.
So what are the proposed fixes? How can they speed this up while still being responsible?
The report makes some pretty bold suggestions. First, set up a dedicated audit committee, perhaps under the Ministry of Commerce, specifically to monitor these EC timelines and publish regular reports. Transparency and accountability.
Naming and shaming almost.
Potentially. Second, give the Expert Appraisal Committee, the EAC, which reviews the projects, more power to make final decisions. Or introduce a deemed clearance rule. If the EAC doesn't make a decision within a set time, say 270 days, the clearance is automatically granted. Puts pressure on the committee.
That's quite radical. Any other ideas?
Yes, allowing companies, at their own risk, to start basic site preparation and civil work earlier in certain cases, specifically for expansions or product mix changes that don't need a public hearing. This could potentially let them start work 120 days sooner.
Shaving off 4 months.
And another big one, getting pre-clearance for entire chemical parks. So individual factories moving in wouldn't need a whole new EC if they fit within the park's overall environmental plan.
Ah, like the hub idea earlier. Streamlining.
Exactly. And eliminating fresh ECs if a company changes its product mix, as long as it doesn't increase the overall pollution load.
What's the ultimate goal for the timeline?
They're aiming for a 6-month average EC process by 2026, with fewer than 10% of projects facing delays. Ambitious, but potentially game-changing.
Definitely. Now, free trade agreements, FTAs, you said they've been a mixed bag?
Yeah, India has about 14 FTAs currently, with more being negotiated. The goal is usually to boost trade. But for chemicals, sometimes zero-duty imports under these FTAs have just led to a flood of cheaper foreign chemicals, hurting domestic producers.
The report singles out the agreement with Japan, the CPA.
Right, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement with Japan. It's a good case study. Since it came into effect around 2011, Japan's chemical exports to India nearly doubled. But India's chemical exports to Japan, very limited growth.
So the trade balance worsened for India.
Significantly. The import-to-export ratio for chemicals between them went from 3-to-1 against India to almost 3.7-to-1 against India by 2023.
Why did that happen?
A lot of it came down to the rules of origin. These rules determine if a product qualifies as made in India or made in Japan for tariff benefits. In this case, the rules often made it easier for Japanese products, maybe with higher Japanese content, to qualify for zero duty into India than for Indian products going the other way.
So the details of the agreement ended up favoring one side. How does the report suggest India approach FTAs differently for chemicals going forward?
They need to be much more targeted in negotiations. Build in specific safeguards for the chemical industry. Things like tariff quotas, allowing a limited amount of critical raw materials in at low duty, but keeping tariffs on the finished products to protect local manufacturers.
So more strategic liberalization.
Exactly. Selective exemptions for key inputs while protecting sensitive finished goods. And also doing a better job of helping Indian exporters actually understand and use the benefits of existing FTAs, simplifying the procedures.
Makes sense. Okay, final piece. Talent and skills. A critical bottleneck, you said.
A huge one. The report flags a major talent and skills gap as a barrier to scaling up the industry.
Where's the disconnect?
A big part of it is the training system. Only about 8 to 10% of the programs in India's industrial training institutes, the ITIs, are actually geared towards the specific skills the chemical industry needs.
So not enough people being trained with the right skills.
Right. You can build fancy plants, but you need trained people to run them safely and efficiently.
What's the proposed fix here?
A three-pronged approach, again. First, simply expand the number of ITIs and specialized chemical training centers, especially near the manufacturing hubs. Scale up the pipeline of talent.
More capacity. What else?
Second, upgrade the faculty. Invest in training the trainers at these ITIs and polytechnics, keeping them updated on the latest technologies and industry practices. Better teachers mean better graduates.
Makes sense. And the third prong?
Strengthen industry-academia partnerships. Get companies and colleges working much closer together. This means developing more industry-relevant courses, petrochemicals, polymer science, industrial safety, and expanding apprenticeships and on-the-job training so students get real-world experience.
Closing that gap between classroom learning and industry needs.
Precisely. It's about creating a workforce that's ready for this ambitious expansion.
Okay, so let's pull this all together. We've covered a lot of ground. The NITI Aayog report lays out this incredibly ambitious vision for India's chemical sector.
It really is bold. Transforming from a net importer with a 3% global share to aiming for 5–6% share. Net zero imports, 1 million jobs by 2030.
And potentially $1 trillion industry by 2040.
It's a massive undertaking, and the report is clear. It requires a huge coordinated effort.
A cohesive approach, as they put it.
Yeah. Bringing together government at all levels, the industry itself, universities, research institutions, even civil society. Everyone needs to pull in the same direction.
And the timing feels critical with the shifts in global supply chains.
Absolutely. There's a real window of opportunity here. Companies worldwide are looking to diversify their manufacturing footprint, often away from heavy reliance on China. If India can implement these reforms quickly and decisively, it really could position itself as a major reliable alternative hub in the global chemicals network.
It's a fascinating prospect. So, as we wrap up, here's a final thought to leave with you. As India pushes for self-sufficiency and global leadership in making chemicals, what deeper role might its innovation, spurred by things like that new R&D fund, play? Could India start shaping the next generation of materials and chemical technologies, going beyond just catching up or meeting existing demand? Something to ponder. We've been on the deep dive.
That's all for this episode of the FinGlimpse podcast. If you found our discussion insightful, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. We'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions for future topics. Until next time, stay informed and make smart decisions. Goodbye.